Hi everyone, this is a Trans Awareness Week video from TransActual for everyone at St George's NHS Foundation Trust. I'm going to be talking to you very briefly about overcoming barriers to healthcare for trans people. I'm Shay Brown, I'm Director for Healthcare at TransActual and my pronouns are he and him. Just in case you don't know, TransActual are a trans-led, trans-run advocacy organisation. We advocate for trans people, we inform trans people and the wider community about trans people's experiences, needs and rights. We empower trans people to live the life that they need and deserve to live, and we empower people to support trans people to do the same. We work in a number of spheres, including healthcare, and we offer healthcare training, we offer consultancy. We've got an area of our website that I'll tell you about later that's full of information for healthcare professionals. So in TransActual's 2021 Trans Life survey, we asked nearly 700 trans people about their experiences of life in the UK, experiences of daily life and housing, transphobia, access to trans-specific healthcare and access to general healthcare. If you go onto the TransActual website, you'll find it, but I just wanted to give you a really quick overview about experiences of discrimination. So when we asked people about experiences of discrimination accessing general healthcare services, by which I mean non-transition specific, 70% of people told us that experienced transphobia, 83% of non-binary people, so that is people that are not a man or a woman, their gender is something else entirely, they'd experienced discrimination. And we found as well that Black trans people and trans people of colour were more likely to experience transphobia than white people, and disabled trans people were more likely to experience transphobia than non-disabled trans people. Incidentally, about half of the respondents to the Trans Life survey identified as disabled. Non-binary specific transphobia is an issue in particular. So discrimination against someone because they're non-binary fits in transphobia broadly, but it can be very specific. It can be something that doesn't impact trans men or trans women. So 83% of non-binary people had experienced non-binary specific discrimination in healthcare services. People don't live their lives just experiencing one sort of oppression or one sort of discrimination at a time, and 69% of trans Black people and trans people of colour told us they'd been impacted by racism when accessing general healthcare services. Similarly, for disabled trans people, 74% of disabled trans people had experienced ableism when experiencing general healthcare services too. There's lots of things that can be a barrier to a trans person accessing healthcare. Common healthcare barriers include being misgendered, so that's being called their old name or having the wrong pronouns used for them. Things like systems and forms not being inclusive. If someone is non-binary and the form is asking them to tick whether they're male or female, and actually they don't identify with either. People having their access to transition related care being withdrawn or fear that it could be withdrawn. Medical practitioners assuming that everything is related to being trans. That's often known as trans broken arm syndrome, where someone presents at A&E with a broken arm and the doctor says, so tell me about your medical transition. Fear of discrimination, which is very real fears you'll see from some of the data we look at in a minute, and previous experiences of discrimination as well. And dysphoria can play a huge part. Dysphoria, that's the sense of unease or discomfort with one's own body or the way the one is treated socially. And dysphoria can be so significant that it would prevent someone leaving the house, let alone phoning up for a doctor's appointment or attending in clinic. And people will tend to typically avoid situations that will make their dysphoria worse. So, for example, a trans man, so that's a transgender person who is a man, but when they were born, they were labelled female. A trans man going to an appointment at gynae would be potentially quite worried that sort of any investigations or procedures might make his dysphoria worse. Something else really important to talk about is trans people's mental health. Content warning here, going to be talking about mental health, eating disorders, self-harm and suicide. Being trans isn't a mental health condition, but the findings of Stonewall's 2018 LGBT in Britain report with a nearly 3/4 experienced anxiety in the last year, 2/3 had experienced depression in the last year, 20% had experienced an eating disorder. So mental health conditions really are prevalent in the trans community. If we look at self-harm, for Stonewall's data is saying, you know, over 1/3 had self-harmed, nearly half had considered taking their own life in the past year alone, and 12% had attempted to take their own life. So if being trans itself isn't a cause of mental health conditions, what is? I could talk for ages about this, but I won't. In short, people's experience of discrimination, their trauma, homelessness, you know, more than 1/4 of respondents to the Trans Lives survey had experienced homelessness. The intense feelings of dysphoria, so that is quite trans specific, although of course it could impact intersex people as well. That's the sort of feeling that there's something about your body that's not right. So for example, for me it would have been that I knew that my chest would feel right flat rather than with breasts, for example, and sort of even thinking about my body before I'd had transition related surgery brings up quite intense feelings for me, and that's I'm not alone in that. But people can also experience social dysphoria, so they can experience sort of dysphoria based on the way they're treated by others. The impact of waiting to access healthcare, and particularly transition-related healthcare, can be huge. TransActual, this week we've released the results of the Transition Access Survey, which looks into people's experiences of accessing medical transition. We found that 84% of respondents for whom it was relevant told us their mental health had been impacted negatively by the wait for transition-related healthcare. These waits can be 5 years or more. Incidentally, the report demonstrates that physical health, work life, personal relationships are also impacted. So what can you do? Think about your policies. Trust-wide, are your staff focused and patient focused policies trans inclusive? Do they use inclusive language? Do they take trans people's needs into account? Do they follow good practice? Most people work in the NHS because they really want to help people. And I believe that most people don't mean to be transphobic or act in a way that leaves trans patients feeling unsupported or misunderstood. For a lot of people, it's a matter of training and access to information. Far too many NHS staff have not high quality training on trans inclusion to help them understand the issues that specifically impact trans people. Think of it like this. Ultimately, we're human beings like anyone else. There's more to us than being trans, but there are certain considerations that healthcare providers need to make. Similarly, training on race equity and disability equity is also essential because healthcare is not trans inclusive unless it's inclusive of all trans people. There's plenty of training and available available, and information too. If you go to TransActual's website, www.transactual.org.uk, and then put in /healthcare, there's a whole section specifically for healthcare providers. The resources available sort of focused on hopefully what you need to know. And there's a huge signposting section to research, professional association and Royal College guidance and things like that. Another thing you can do is signal that you're trans inclusive. So it's great that the Trust are marking Trans Awareness Week, things like marking Trans Day of Visibility, LGBT plus History Month, having rainbow lanyards, NHS rainbow badges, things like that. But it's just important to do other stuff rather than just signal your intention. You need to back it up. Make sure your systems are inclusive. When people ask you to update the records, do it. If your system's proven a bit tricky because it's not non-binary inclusive, find a workaround and let the person in charge of the system know that it needs improving to be non-binary inclusive. Make sure you use inclusive language on forms. So, for example, maternity. Are you asking for the mother's name, or are you asking for the name of the mother or the birthing parent? You know, are you making assumptions about who's the person that's giving birth and who their partner is? And provide options for non-binary people too. Think about how people are going to feel coming to your trust or to your hospital, to your clinic. What's their first impression going to be, and how is that going to set them up in anticipating their appointments with you? So once you've got them to your waiting room, again, that's going to set them up for their experience in the appointment. If they've already had a bad experience, they're going to be primed for a bad experience in your clinic or in your room, you know, on your ward. So thinking about trans inclusion, it started from before they've checked in, but in the waiting room, are there trans inclusive displays? So, you know, if you're a prostate, if you've got a prostate cancer clinic, is there, you know, amongst these the sort of posters that are directed at men, is there a poster with a trans woman on it? How do you call people into an appointment? Could you schedule, if it's a sort of clinic that's typically associated with men or with women, could you sort of have some flexibility about popping a trans patient in at the start or the end of the clinic so that they don't have to sit in the waiting room around too many people? Do staff on reception understand that you can't make assumptions about a person's body parts when they're checking in with you? Little things can make a big difference. So they've made it into your appointment room. Good. Introduce yourself. Something like I did at the start of this, I introduced myself with my pronouns. Introduce yourself. It's a good way of signaling that you've got a level of trans awareness, that you understand why someone might introduce themselves with their pronouns. Find ways to demonstrate your understanding that they might have a mental health condition, that they might have had previous bad experiences with professionals. You could mention, if relevant, only if relevant, other trans patients have found it more comfortable too. You know, quick and easy way to signal that you're thinking about trans inclusion is introducing yourself and sharing your pronouns. Things like a rainbow badge or a lanyard, like I've said, can introduce or sort of show that you're inclusive. Hopefully listening and being patient-centered should go without saying, but just remember, you know, trans people are people that happen to be trans. So remember, treat the person, not the adjective. Ask yourself if the trans bit is relevant. And if it is relevant, do ask questions that you need to, and perhaps explain why you're asking, but don't make assumptions. And that's as well, don't make assumptions that someone is or isn't trans, or hasn't had good or bad experiences based on their background, based on their disability. Questions about hormones and surgery, if they're clinically relevant, ask them. Just always ask yourself, why am I asking? And be proactive. If there's not something you're sure about, find out more information. Remember, this person's overcome a lot of barriers to even arrive at their appointment with you today, and or on your ward, and they need your help to overcome additional ones. Facilities. So first things first, single sex wards. It's things that people ask about a lot. National NHS guidance states that trans men can go on men's wards, trans women can go on women's wards. However, do remember that trans people might be self-conscious and might need a bit more privacy. So a trans woman who isn't able to have a shave until late in the day or at all might be self-conscious of her stubble or facial hair. A trans man who has a binder to flatten his chest might struggle to be seen without it, but shouldn't bind for more than 8 hours a day. And both of those things could impact non-binary people depending on their anatomy. If you've got a neutral space for a non-binary person, that's good. But otherwise, ask them where they'd be more comfortable. Ultimately, it's good practice to give options. If in doubt, ask the patient. And when you're thinking about inpatient stays, there are differences that are relevant. So, for example, don't assume that a trans man is going to need a urine bottle. He might have not had surgery. He might sit to go to the toilet. But he might need a urine bottle. He might have had phalloplasty or metoidioplasty surgery. So just ask discreetly and sensitively. And sometimes you need to know if someone's pregnant. So some trans men or non-binary people could be pregnant. Be sensitive about asking. But if it's important to know, do ask. Just do it sensitively and explain why you're asking. And think about toilets. Have your men's toilets got a sanitary bin in them for trans men or for non-binary people that might be using men's toilets? Have you got gender-neutral toilets available? So that was a whistle-stop tour to creating a more trans-inclusive trust. For more information, you can email transactualuk@gmail.com, and you can go to the TransActual website, www.transactual.org.uk, and then /healthcare for some healthcare specific resources. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great Trans Awareness Week.